Hello everyone, thanks for joining us again today. We're here at the Caribou Public Library. I'm Miss Erin, and this is our chapter book story time. We're going to be reading the first half of chapter 29 of Little Women. This is by Louisa May Alcott, and we'll go ahead and start right away. So, chapter 9 is called Calls. Come, Joe, it's time. For what? You don't mean to say you've forgotten that you promised to make half a dozen calls with me today? I've done a good many rash and foolish things in my life, but I don't think I ever was mad enough to say I'd make 6 calls in one day when a single one upsets me for a week. Yes, you did. It was a bargain between us. I was to finish the crayon of Beth for you, and you were to go properly with me and return our neighbors' visits. If it was fair, that was in the bond, and I shall stand to the letter of my bond, Shylock. There is a pile of clouds in the east. It's not fair, and I don't go. Now that's shirking. It's a lovely day, no prospect of rain, and you pride yourself on keeping promises. So be honorable, come and do your duty, and then be at peace for another 6 months. At that minute, Jo was particularly absorbed in dressmaking, for she was a mantua maker general to the family, and took a special credit to herself because she could use a needle as well as a pen. It was very provoking to be arrested in the act of first trying on and ordered out to make calls in her best array on a warm July day. She hated calls of the formal sort, and never made any until Amy cornered her with a bargain, bribe, or promise. In the present instance, there was no escape, and having clashed her scissors rebelliously while protesting that she smelt thunder, she gave in, put away her work, and, taking up her hat and gloves with an air of resignation, told Amy the victim was ready. Jo March, you are perverse enough to provoke a saint. You don't intend to make calls in that state, I hope, cried Amy, surveying her with amazement. Why not? I'm neat and cool and comfortable, quite proper for a dusty walk on a warm day. If people care more for my clothes than they do for me, I don't wish to see them. You can dress for both and be as elegant as you please. It pays for you to be fine. It doesn't for me, and furbelows only worry me. Oh, dear, sighed Amy. Now she's in a contrary fit, and will drive me distracted before I can get her properly ready. I'm sure it's no pleasure to me to go today, but it's a debt we owe society, and there's no one to pay it but you and me. I'll do anything for you, Jo, if you'll only dress yourself nicely and come and help me do the civil. You can talk so well and look so aristocratic in your best things and behave so beautifully. If you only try, that I'm proud of you. I'm afraid to go alone. Do come and take care of me. You're an artful little puss to flatter and wheedle your cross old sister in that way. The idea of my being aristocratic and well-bred, and your being afraid to go anywhere alone, I don't know which is the most absurd. Well, I'll go if I must, and I'll do my best. You shall be commander of the expedition, and I'll obey blindly. Will that satisfy you? Said Jo, with a sudden change from perversity to lamb-like submission. You're a perfect cherub. Now, put on all your best things, and I'll tell you how to behave at each place, so that you will make a good impression. I want people to like you, and they would if you only try to be a little more agreeable. Do your hair the pretty way, and put the pink rose in your bonnet. It's becoming. And you look too sober in your plain suit. Take your light kids and the embroidered handkerchief. We'll stop at Meg's and borrow her white sunshade, and then you can have my dove-colored one. While Amy dressed, she issued her orders, and Jo obeyed them, not without entering her protest, however, for she sighed as she rustled into her new organdy, frowned darkly at herself as she tied her bonnet strings in an irreproachable bow, wrestled viciously with pins as she put on her collar, wrinkled up her features generally as she shook out the handkerchief, whose embroidery was as irritating to her nose as the present mission was to her feelings, and when she'd squeezed her hands into tight gloves with 2 buttons and a tassel, as the last touch of elegance, she turned to Amy with an imbecile expression of countenance, saying meekly, I'm perfectly miserable, but if you consider me presentable, I die happy. You are highly satisfactory. Turn slowly round and let me get a careful view. Jo revolved, and Amy gave a touch here and there, then fell back with her head to one side, observing graciously, Yes, you'll do. Your head is all I could ask, for that white bonnet with the rose is quite ravishing. Hold back your shoulders and carry your hands easily, no matter if your gloves do pinch. There's one thing you can do well, Joe, and that is wear a shawl. I can't, but it's very nice to see you, and I'm so glad Miss Norton gave you that lovely one. It's simple but handsome, and those folds over the arm are really artistic. Is the point of my mantle in the middle, and have I looped my dress evenly? I like to show my boots, for my feet are pretty, though my nose isn't. You are a thing of beauty and a joy forever, said Joe, looking through her hand with the air of a connoisseur at the blue feather against the gold hair. Am I to drag my best dress through the dust, or loop it up? Please, ma'am. Hold it up when you walk, but drop it in the house. The sweeping style suits you best, and you must learn to trail your skirts gracefully. You haven't half buttoned one cuff. Do it at once. You never look finished if you're not careful about the little details, for they make up the pleasing whole. Joe sighed and proceeded to burst the buttons off her glove and doing up her cuff, but at last both were ready and sailed away looking as pretty as pictures, Hannah said, as she hung out the upper window to watch them. Now, Joe dear, the Chesters are very elegant people, so I want you to put on your best deportment. Don't make any of your abrupt remarks or do anything odd, will you? Just be calm, cool, and quiet. That's safe and ladylike. And you can easily do that for 15 minutes, said Amy, as they approached the first place, having borrowed a white parasol and being inspected by Meg with a baby on each arm. Let me see. Calm, cool, and quiet. Yes, I think I can promise that. I've played the part of a prim young lady on the stage, and I'll try it off. My powers are great, as you shall see, so be easy in your mind, my child. Amy looked relieved, but naughty Joe took her at her word, for during the first call she sat with every limb gracefully composed, every fold correctly draped, calm as a summer sea, cool as a snowbank, and as silent as a sphinx. In vain Mrs. Chester alluded to her charming novel, and the Mrs. Chester introduced parties, picnics, and opera and the fashions. Each and all were answered by a smile, a bow, and a demure yes or no, with the chill on. In vain Amy telegraphed the word talk. Tried to draw her out, and administered covert pokes with her foot. Joe sat as if blandly unconscious of it all, with deportment like Maud's face, icily regular, splendidly null. What a haughty, uninteresting creature that oldest Miss March is, was the unfortunately audible remark of one of the ladies, as the door closed upon their guests. Joe laughed noiselessly all through the hall, but Amy looked disgusted at the failure of her instructions, and very naturally laid the blame upon Joe. How could you mistake me so? I merely meant that you should be properly dignified and composed, and you made yourself a perfect stock and stone. Try to be social at the Lambs, gossip as the other girls do, and be interested in dress and flirtations and whatever nonsense comes up. They move in the best society and are valuable persons for us to know, and I wouldn't fail to make a good impression there for anything. I'll be agreeable. I'll gossip and giggle and have horrors and raptures over any trifle you like. I rather enjoy this, and now I'll imitate what is called a charming girl. I can do it, for I have May Chester as a model, and I'll improve upon her. See if the Lambs don't say, what a lively, nice creature that Joe March is. Amy felt anxious, as well she might, for when Joe turned freakish, there was no knowing where she would stop. Amy's face was a study when she saw her sister skim into the next drawing-room, kiss all the young ladies with effusion, beam graciously upon the young gentlemen, and join in the chat with a spirit which amazed the beholder. Amy was taken possession of by Mrs. Lamb, with whom she was a favorite, and forced to hear a long account of Lucretia's last attack, while 3 delightful young gentlemen hovered near, waiting for a pause when they might rush in and rescue her. So situated, she was powerless to check Joe, who seemed possessed by a spirit of mischief, and talked away as volubly as the old lady. A knot of heads gathered about her, and Amy strained her ears to hear what was going on, for broken sentences filled her with alarm. Round eyes and uplifted hands tormented her with curiosity, and frequent peals of laughter made her wild to share the fun. One may imagine her suffering on overhearing fragments of this sort of conversation. She rides splendidly. Who taught her? No one. She used to practice mounting, holding the reins and sitting straight on an old saddle in a tree. Now she rides anything, for she don't know what fear is, and the stableman lets her have horses cheap because she trains them and carries ladies so well. She has such a passion for it, I often tell her if anything else fails, she can be a pretty horse breaker and get her living so. At this awful speech, Amy contained herself with difficulty, for the impression was being given that she was rather a fast young lady, which was her special aversion. What could she do? For the old lady was in the middle of her story, and long before it was done, Joe was off again, making more droll revelations and committing still more feeble blunders. Yes, Amy was in despair that day, for all the good beasts were gone, and of the 3 left, one was lame, one blind, and the other so bulky that you had to put dirt in his mouth before he would start. Nice animal for a pleasure party, wasn't it? Which did she choose? Asked one of the laughing gentlemen, who enjoyed the subject. None of them. She heard of a young horse at the farmhouse over the river, and, though a lady had never ridden him, she resolved to try, because he was handsome and spirited. Her struggles were really pathetic. There were no one to bring the horses to the saddle, so she took the saddle to the horse. My dear creature, she actually rode it over the river, put it on her head, and marched up to the barn, to the utter amazement of the old man. Did she ride the horse? Of course she did, and she had a capital time. I expected to see her brought home in fragments, but she managed him perfectly, and was the life of the party. Well, I call that plucky. And young Mr. Lamb turned an approving glance upon Amy, wondering what his mother could be saying to make the girl so red and uncomfortable. She was still redder and more uncomfortable a moment after, when a sudden turn in the conversation introduced the subject of dress. One of the young ladies asked Joe where she got the pretty drab hat that she wore to the picnic. And stupid Joe, instead of mentioning the place where it was bought 2 years ago, must needs answer with unnecessary frankness, "Oh, Amy painted it. You can't buy those soft shades, so we paint ours any color we like. It's a great comfort to have an artistic sister." "Isn't that an original idea?" cried Miss Lamb, who found Joe great fun. "That's nothing compared to some of her brilliant performances. There's nothing the child can't do. Why, she wanted a pair of blue boots for Sally's party, so she just painted her solid white ones the loveliest shade of sky blue that you ever saw, and they looked exactly like satin," added Joe, with an air of pride in her sister's accomplishments that exasperated Amy until she felt that it would be a relief to throw her card case at her. "We read a story of yours the other day, and we enjoyed it very much," observed the elder Miss Lamb, wishing to compliment the literary lady, who did not look the character just then, it must be confessed. Any mention of her works always had a bad effect upon Joe, who either grew rigid and looked offended, or changed the subject with a brusque remark, as now. "Sorry you could find nothing better to read. I write that rubbish because it sells, and ordinary people like it. Are you going to New York this winter?" As Miss Lamb had enjoyed this story, this speech was not exactly grateful or complimentary. The minute it was made, Joe saw her mistake, but, fearing to make the matter worse, suddenly remembered that it was for her to make the first move toward departure, and did so with an abruptness that left 3 people with half-finished sentences in their mouths. "Amy, we must go. Goodbye, dear. Do come and see us. We are pining for a visit. I don't dare to ask you, Mr. Lamb, but if you should come, I don't think I shall have a heart to send you away." Joe said this with such a droll imitation of May Chester's gushing style that Amy got out of the room as rapidly as possible, feeling a strong desire to laugh and cry at the same time. "Didn't I do that well?" asked Joe with a satisfied air as they walked away. "Nothing could have been worse," was Amy's crushing reply. "What possessed you to tell all those stories about my saddle, and the hats and boots, and all the rest of it?" "Why, it's funny and amuses people. They know we're poor, so it's no use pretending that we have grooms, buy 3 or 4 hats a season, and have things as easy and fine as they do. You needn't go and tell them all our little shifts and expose our poverty in that perfectly unnecessary way. You haven't a bit of proper pride, and never will learn when to hold your tongue, and when to speak," said Amy despairingly. Poor Jo looked abashed, and silently chafed the end of her nose with a stiff handkerchief, as if performing a penance for her misdemeanors. "How shall I behave here?" she asked, as they approached the 3rd mansion. "Just as you please. I wash my hands of you," was Amy's short answer. "Then I'll enjoy myself. The boys are at home, and we'll have a comfortable time. Goodness knows I need a little change, for elegance has a bad effect upon my constitution," returned Jo, gruffly, being disturbed by her failures to suit. We'll start with the beginning of that next visit next time, so hope you join us then. Bye for now.